We've been uncovering amazing remains of a Byzantine church complex. The church covers an area of about 1.5 dunums.
Imagine this. Buried under centuries of mud and silence, a single inscription has just emerged. Just a few lines of ancient Greek, but they could shake the very foundations of Christian theology. And no, not in Rome, not in theory, but right in Galilee, where the story first began. Archaeologists have made a discovery that some are calling the most significant biblical find since the moon landing. A 1,500-year-old Byzantine church, hidden near the Sea of Galilee. It may have been built over the very hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. Inside, perfectly preserved through time, they found a mosaic, so clear it looks like it was made yesterday, and its message? Bold and unmistakable. Peter wasn't just an apostle. He was the chief apostle, the one who held the keys to the kingdom of heaven. This isn't just another ancient ruin, it's a window into the earliest roots of Christianity, and it could change everything we thought we knew. This isn't just history, it's theological dynamite. A divine message, etched in stone, may have just tipped the balance in one of Christianity's most debated questions. What does it mean? And why is no one talking about it? Stick with me, because this could change everything. This is the discovery that shook the ground. Every so often, something is uncovered that doesn't just add to our knowledge, it challenges us. This is one of those moments. For more than a century, theologians, historians, and pilgrims have wrestled with the location of one of the Bible's most important towns, Bethsaida. Mentioned several times in the New Testament, Bethsaida is recognized as the hometown of 3 key apostles, Peter, Andrew, and Philip. John 1:44 says it clearly, "Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter." But for generations, one question has haunted biblical scholars. Where exactly was Bethsaida? Theories came and went, clues surfaced and faded, but no single piece of evidence ever settled the debate. Until now. On the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee, close enough to touch the very waters where Jesus once walked, a team of archaeologists may have just found the answer. A team of archaeologists, led by Professor Mordecai Aviam and Dr. Stephen Notley, has uncovered something remarkable: the ruins of a Byzantine-era church buried beneath layers of earth for over 1,400 years. But what they found inside goes far beyond archaeology. It touches the very heart of theology. At the center of the ancient mosaic floor, written in flowing Koine Greek, glowed an inscription that directly names Peter, not just as an apostle or a disciple, but as the chief of the apostles and the bearer of the keys to the kingdom of heaven. The wording is strikingly familiar. It echoes Matthew 16:19, where Jesus says to Peter, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." What makes this discovery so extraordinary isn't just the message. It's the condition it was found in. The mosaic, untouched for nearly a millennium and a half, looks almost brand new. The lines are crisp, the letters sharp, and the message completely intact, as if time itself had been held back. It's as though this inscription was sealed away, preserved for this very moment in history. The response from scholars and theologians has been a mix of awe and deep reflection. Dr. Craig Evans, a leading expert on the historical Jesus, has remarked that this may be one of the most significant. This may be the clearest archaeological link to Peter's actual hometown ever discovered. Dr. Stephen Notley, co-director of the El Araj excavations, put it simply, "It's not just about the mosaic, it's about what it confirms. The church, the town, the people, everything is coming together." But to grasp just how important this moment is, we need to look back at why the story of Bethsaida remains one of biblical archaeology's most enduring mysteries. Bethsaida, lost and found through time. Once a thriving fishing village, Bethsaida's name literally means House of the Fishermen in Aramaic, a fitting title for the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip, men whose lives were forever changed by a Galilean teacher. The Gospels describe Bethsaida as a place of miracles, where Jesus healed the blind, Mark 8:22, fed thousands with just a few loaves and fish, Luke 9:10-17, and walked on water nearby. Yet Bethsaida is also one of the few cities Jesus openly rebuked. "Woe to you, Bethsaida," he said, "for if the miracles done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago." After that harsh condemnation, the town vanishes, from scripture and eventually from history. In the Middle Ages, pilgrims searched for its location using fragments of legend and tradition, but no clear answer ever emerged. The land had swallowed the city, and with it, a crucial part of the Gospel's physical setting. In the 19th century, German and American researchers suggested that Bethsaida might be Et Tel, a mound roughly 2 kilometers inland from the Sea of Galilee. But this raised serious questions. The site was too far from the water for a fishing village, and it lacked solid evidence from the Roman period, the time of Jesus. For such an important town of fishermen, it didn't quite fit. A turning point came after the 1967 Six-Day War, when access to the area reopened. Israeli surveys began to draw attention to a different location, El Araj, a low-lying site much closer to the shoreline. Pottery, glass, and mosaic fragments hinted at continuous human activity over centuries. Interest in El Araj grew, especially after a symbolic moment in the early 2000s. Pope John Paul II flew over the area and was presented with a replica of an ancient bronze key found at the site, a powerful symbol referencing Peter and the promise of authority from Matthew 16. By 2016, a formal excavation team, supported by institutions like the University of Nebraska at Omaha, began a full-scale dig at El Araj. What they found would begin to reshape everything we thought we knew. In their very first season of digging, the team uncovered undeniable signs of Roman-era life, including coins and tools that dated back to the 1st century CE. By 2018, the excavation had revealed the foundations of a Byzantine basilica, along with the remains of a bathhouse, guest quarters, and a larger public complex. And then they found the inscriptions. Delicately framed in a geometric mosaic, the Greek text offered a prayer for a man named Constantine, not the emperor, but likely a local patron. And within that same inscription was a stunning declaration. Peter, referred to directly as the chief of the apostles and holder of the keys to the heavenly realms. This discovery closely matches the 8th century writings of Willibald, a Bavarian bishop who traveled to Bethsaida and recorded spending the night in a church dedicated to Peter and Andrew. For decades, scholars dismissed his account as legend or pious imagination. But now, it appears the very church he described has finally been uncovered. The stones are real, the titles are intact, and the language is bold, theological, and clear, declaring what early Christians genuinely believed about Peter's role in their faith. The church beneath the soil. Beneath centuries of Galilean earth, hidden under layers of flood-swept mud and silence, lay a sacred building, long forgotten by history. It waited quietly while kingdoms rose and crumbled, while empires redrew borders, and while Christian traditions grew and divided. Then, in 2016, archaeologists put shovel to ground, and the soil finally gave up its secret. At El Araj, the dig began with questions, but answers quickly surfaced. Within just a few weeks, the team uncovered the foundations of a Byzantine church built directly atop older Roman-era structures. It wasn't just a religious building, it was part of a much larger complex. A church, a bathhouse, and what appeared to be an ancient guest house, likely used by pilgrims or monks. Exactly the kind of site you'd expect in a place with deep Christian roots. And then, the written word returned, quite literally. 3 separate Greek inscriptions were discovered embedded in the church's mosaic floor. 2 were damaged, but 1 remained almost perfectly preserved. And in just a few lines, it carried the weight of over 1,000 years of faith. Inside a beautifully crafted circle of tiny tessellated stones, the inscription read, "The whole work of paving the diaconicon with mosaic was done by the zeal of Constantine, servant of Christ, for the chief of the apostles and holder of the keys of the heavenly spheres. St. Peter, intercede for him and his children." This isn't just poetic, it's powerful, it's personal. It's a glimpse into what the early church believed, written not in legend, but in stone. This isn't metaphor, it's precise, theological, and intentional language. The inscription doesn't simply refer to Peter as a disciple. It calls him Chief of the Apostles, a title that doesn't suggest equality, but leadership, authority, and spiritual primacy. It refers to him as the holder of the keys, a phrase that echoes Jesus' words in Matthew 16:19 and draws deeply from the messianic imagery of Isaiah 22:22, where keys symbolize dynastic succession and exclusive responsibility. The use of such elevated terms isn't accidental. It reflects what early Byzantine Christians truly believed, not only about Peter himself, but about the very location where this church stood. Even more remarkable is how closely this discovery matches the account of Willibald, the Bavarian bishop, who in 725 AD described staying overnight in a church at Bethsaida, dedicated to Peter and Andrew. His writings speak of a waterside location, guest accommodations, and a sense of sacred remembrance. For centuries, his words were dismissed as devotional fiction, the kind of romanticized tale medieval pilgrims were known for. But now, with the discovery of the church, its layout, its dedication to Peter, and its position near the Sea of Galilee, everything lines up. Willibald's story is no longer just a medieval curiosity. It may very well be eyewitness testimony, memory carved in stone. This church didn't just preserve names and prayers. It preserved memory. It preserved belief. And in doing so, it offers something exceedingly rare in biblical archaeology, a living bridge between the written record and the physical world. That bridge brings us to a much bigger question, not just what this site is, but why it matters. Why this discovery changes everything. It's one thing to find the ruins of an old church, but it's something entirely different to find a church intentionally built over a first-century village, a village that fits the gospel accounts in both geography and story, a place that may very well be the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. This isn't just poetic symmetry. This is historical continuity, literally rising from the ground. A sacred legacy preserved not just in scripture, but in stone, in structure, and in the living memory of the early church. The church at El Araj, likely built in the 5th or 6th century, was not placed at random. Early Christians didn't build their churches wherever they pleased. They chose sites with deep spiritual meaning, places they remembered, honored, and believed God had moved. We see this throughout the Holy Land. The Church of the Nativity stands over the cave in Bethlehem believed to mark the birthplace of Christ. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre rises in Jerusalem at the site Christians have long held to be the place of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. Now the church at El Araj may join those sacred sites, not just as a historical monument, but as a witness to belief, a witness to tradition, and perhaps a witness to the very beginnings of Christianity. In Jerusalem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre stands over the traditional site of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. In Nazareth, the Church of the Annunciation marks the moment the angel appeared to Mary. And now, perhaps, the long-lost town of Bethsaida, debated for centuries and nearly forgotten, has re-emerged with the same unmistakable signs of sacred memory. The people who built this church didn't have the tools we rely on today. No satellite maps, no radiocarbon dating, no advanced excavation equipment. What they had was something else entirely: living memory, oral tradition, and a spiritual map drawn from faith and proximity. They didn't build this church by accident. They built it because they knew, not in theory, but through stories passed down, from those who lived it, what had happened there. The memory hadn't faded, and now, what they remembered is being confirmed by modern science. Excavations at El Araj show clear signs of life from the 1st century: coins, pottery, tools, and building foundations, all pointing to a lively, thriving fishing village. This wasn't a vague guess. This was a real place with real people, real lives, and very possibly real apostles. And rising above it all, a church. But not just any church. A church dedicated to Peter, the man to whom Jesus said, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." That alone would be incredible. But the inscription found within that church takes it even further. It doesn't just honor Peter as a saint or one of many apostles. It gives him a distinct title, Chief of the Apostles. That's not just a respectful phrase. That's a bold theological statement. The word used, koryphaios, isn't vague. It implies leadership, primacy, a head among equals, It identifies Peter as the one chosen to lead, not by popularity or personality, but by divine calling. And here's something truly remarkable. This wasn't written in Latin, it didn't come from Rome, and it's not part of a later papal claim. It was written in Greek, laid into the mosaic floor by Byzantine Christians, centuries before the East-West Schism, in a region far closer to the apostles in both time and geography. That matters, because it tells us something important. The belief in Peter's unique role among the apostles wasn't just a later Roman development. It was already present in the early church, in both East and West, rooted in the worship and theology of believers who were still close to the source. And perhaps most striking of all is the second title given to Peter. Keys to the Kingdom of Heaven. This isn't just poetic language or decorative theology. It's a direct reference to Matthew 16:19, one of the most pivotal verses in Catholic teaching. It's the moment Jesus gives Peter spiritual authority, the power to bind and loose, with consequences that echo into eternity. That single verse has shaped church councils, sparked debates during the Reformation, and been taught in catechisms for centuries. And now, the very words and meaning behind that verse have been found, not in a manuscript, but carved in stone, in the land where Peter actually lived. What's astonishing is that this inscription comes from a time long before most of the major theological arguments even began. No, it doesn't answer every question, but it does prove something vital. It shows that early Christians, from a region close to Peter in time and place, already recognized and celebrated his unique role. They didn't see him as just one of many. They saw him as the leader, the one chosen by Christ himself, the keys, the kingdom, and the centuries-long debate. For nearly 2,000 years, Peter's role has been a focal point of Christian identity, and often division. Critics of the Catholic view often cite Matthew 18:18, where Jesus gives the authority to bind and loose to all the apostles. This, they argue, means Peter wasn't uniquely privileged, but simply a representative of the group. And yes, Jesus did give authority to all the apostles. But there's a key difference. Only Peter was given the keys. In the ancient world, keys weren't just tools. They were powerful symbols. They represented trust, authority, and exclusive access, often delegated by kings to those they appointed as stewards of their household or realm. Keys meant you had the power to act on behalf of the ruler. To hold the king's keys was to carry his authority, to act in his name when he was not present. That's the weight behind the image of keys. It's not just symbolic, it's deeply rooted in Scripture, especially in Isaiah 22:22, where God says of Eliakim, "I will place on his shoulder the key to the house of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open." This verse has long been seen as a foreshadowing, not just of Christ's divine authority, but of the one he would appoint to carry that authority forward. That parallel becomes unmistakable in Matthew 16, where Jesus gives Peter the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Now, the recent discovery at El Araj strengthens that connection. It shows that the belief in Peter's unique authority, his role as leader and spiritual steward, wasn't invented centuries later. It didn't originate in medieval Rome. It wasn't the result of papal politics. It was already embraced by the early Byzantine Church, centuries before the split between East and West, and long before any formal structures of the papacy had developed. In this one inscription, we see the convergence of scripture, tradition, and memory, carved into stone, not to prove a doctrine, but to honor a belief that was already well established. Even in Galilee, Peter was recognized not just as a disciple, but as the one who held the keys to the kingdom. No, this discovery doesn't prove the papacy. It doesn't demand that everyone adopt Catholic theology, but it does show that the Catholic interpretation has ancient roots, not just in Rome, but in the very land where Peter lived and walked. For non-Catholics, this isn't necessarily a challenge to their faith, but it is a challenge to consider: can a belief so old, so widespread, and so geographically grounded be dismissed as a later invention? Or does it deserve a closer look, a deeper reflection on the early church's understanding of leadership, authority, and unity? What began as a routine excavation has turned into something far more meaningful, a moment where faith, history, and scripture come together in the soil of Galilee. The mosaic found at El Araj is more than a piece of art. It's a preserved voice from the past, clear, bold, and undistorted by time. It affirms not only Peter's name, but his role, his authority, and the deep memory the early Christians carried and passed on. This isn't just about archaeology. It's about the continuity of belief across centuries, cultures, and continents, now confirmed by the very earth where it all began. In an age where many question the reliability of sacred tradition, this humble inscription speaks volumes. It stands as a quiet thunderclap, reminding us that the early church remembered more than we thought and preserved more than we ever imagined. One reader put it best: "This is the most important thing I've read since the moon landing." Because in that moment, it wasn't just about remembering the past, it was about uncovering it. History wasn't just studied, it was brought to light. And now, we're left with a new kind of question, not if it happened, but what we do with what we now know. History and faith have met, face to face, and the dust is still settling.